Morning, everybody. John McNamara, your Wilbur-Ellis agronomist, with your July field update here out of the Plattsmouth branch location. So here we are again in our Sentinel corn plot, or cornfield for that matter, checking on development. And as you can see, we're basically finishing up pollination through the dry brown silk, and that's where you can generally determine when pollination is complete is when the silks turn brown. And these are still a little sticky, but they're generally pollinated. I peel back the husks as far as checking pollination. And then this is, again, a very common practice in this time of year. Now, again, we've talked about the ill-fated effects of the crop doing and wrestling with dry weather. Here in July at this specific location, we've had upwards of 6 to 7 inches of rain since we last spoke, which was a lifesaver as far as the corn grows. But on the flip side of it, there's still some ill-fated effects, as you can kind of see on this ear as we look at it. So this is probably very typical of what we're going to find in what we deal with tipping back. Here's some corn earworm feeding on this, but you see some uneven filling of those developing kernels, and the ear's generally short. It's not going to get any bigger than that. And from a stage standpoint, this is what we call blister. So when you try to take your fingernail and pop it, it'll pop out like that. So now we're into the starch filling and turning towards soft dough development in the kernel. All the energy of the plant is directed towards filling out the kernels that have been pollinated. Now, is it a possibility if we got into a hotter stretch of weather that we might lose some of the kernels on these tips? Yes, very possible that might happen. And you're going to see a varying degree on this depending upon where you are, how much rain you did get in July, as far as you might have ears that are much larger than this, and you might have ears that are much smaller than this, with a varying degree of success in the pollination. Now, the other thing that we talked about here back in June was unevenness and kind of things that lingered from sins of the spring. And here's another example. If you remember, we talked about shorter plants that didn't emerge real well, whether it was due to compaction, dry weather. I think it was primarily dry weather. And we talk about the plant turning into a weed. In many areas, you're probably going to see a lot more of the ears that look like something like this. And this is, again, what we talk about. We can talk about beer can ears. We can talk about popcorn ears. Little ears like this that plants generally turn into a weed. Now, does this go towards yield? Sure it does. It does. But from a standpoint of productive ears and that type of thing, it's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 20-ish, 25%-ish of normal from a developmental side. Okay, let's hop across the road and we'll go and take a look at development on the soybeans. So here we are now in one of our competitive soybean plots. What we did here is that we offered a couple of XtendFlex numbers, Asgrow XtendFlex numbers, into an E3 trial. And we're seeing some of the similar things that we experienced on previous YouTube pieces this summer surrounding differences with E3s versus XtendFlex. So as we kind of pan across this plot, things that we saw back in June are still fairly evident now in late July, and we've got some additional issues that are happening now. Again, we talked about increased rain, 5 to 6 inches of rain in this area since the beginning of July. However, as we kind of look at these things, there are still evidence that these beans were puckered and still are. And here's an example right here where they still have evidence of the things puckering up. Is that a product of genetics? Is it a product of the trait mix? Is it a product of the weather? Well, the answer to that is all yes. If you look at some of this new growth, it's unfurled. However, we've still done some impactful things with the plant height of these E3s. And as you can imagine, with a shorter plant height, you don't have near the canopy, and weed control is going to suffer because of it. I'm not saying that you can't have weed escapes in August in XtendFlex soybeans. However, shorter beans that had a puckered, smaller canopy with 5 to 6 inches of rains from July, the chances of you having increased weed problems, especially late season, especially when the beans are trying to pod and fill out, can become an issue. So along those lines, we're standing in some extend flick beans and markedly plant height differences. If we pull one up, we can see that we are still in full bloom and we have pod initiation. If you remember, we always pod from the base of the plant up, and we still have a ways to go as far as podding and development, but we have initiated some of these pods. If we again look at the development of the competitive stuff, as far as the development goes, bushier plant all right, and we're a little bit further behind. We do have pod initiation, but we're a little bit further behind. Doesn't mean a thing as far as yield potential and that type of thing. However, there's still lingering evidence of problems with cupping and puckering and that type of thing with some of these E3 soybeans. August is the month in which we make the bean crop. If we continue to have rains, we should have pretty fair yields. However, we've got a ways to go. It's really crunch time with soybeans as we get into the next couple of weeks into August. So we'll circle back to beet trials again in an August update, kind of give you a developmental update as far as where and how these things have developed as we progress through August.